And now your chairman, the Honorable Robert Moses, City Construction Coordinator. Commissioner Moses.
Governor Dewey, Mayor Impellitteri, Borough President Fitzgerald, ladies and gentlemen. This is one of the great new mixed traffic arteries which are being built by the state with state and federal funds, with the city participating, of course, as to the layout and paying part of the cost of the rights of way. In the past, we've got people accustomed to parkways, which, as you know, are restricted to passenger vehicles. The parkways have certainly served their purpose. They're narrow, shoestring parks, landscaped, they have no lights, no traffic lights, and they're lined with parks and playgrounds which can be used by people who don't have cars. But we haven't done anything up to now. We're beginning in a big way to take care of other than passenger vehicles. That is, trucks and buses. They need their express arteries just as much as the passenger vehicles do. In some respects more. We've got to separate those vehicles that are on through business from the ordinary street traffic, where they're a hazard to people on foot, where they choke up traffic, and where they have to be cleared out of the way if we're going to avoid the congestion that we're getting into. This represents, as has been said earlier in the day, the cooperation, the close cooperation of the federal, state, and city governments, with the state government letting the actual contracts. Now, in all these matters, there's a very close relationship to local improvements. Because we disturb utilities, we have to move people, and we're running into all sorts of charter provisions that involve the borough government. We've been very fortunate in this particular case in having, as borough president, a man who has been commissioner of borough works, who is an assemblyman and knows Albany, and who has been enormously cooperative throughout this entire enterprise. I take pleasure, therefore, in presenting to you now Borough President Fitzgerald.
Commissioner, Governor Dewey, Mayor Impellitteri, ladies and gentlemen, I want to first welcome to Queens, His Excellency the Governor, His Honor the Mayor. I believe that this beautiful sunshiny day is an auspicious beginning for this great highway. Commissioner Moses described for you briefly the functions of the highway. The state has constructed the highway. The city and the borough cooperated in its design. These are not the things that I propose to speak about. Something new has been added here. For the entire life of this great city, and of other cities throughout the state and nation, when the time came for the municipality or the state or the government to step in and say, we want this land for a public improvement, that was all there was to it. They stepped in, seized the land. The owners of the land or of the homes that stood upon it went into the courts, and in the course of time, frequently in the course of a long time, they received an award to compensate them for their loss. and no compensation for the waiting period. When the time came, traffic requirements in this borough made necessary the construction of a superhighway such as this. I raised the question as a resident of the community, of the neighborhood, as to what we would do with the people who lived along the right-of-way, and I protested.
Thank you.
That we just couldn't run in, particularly in times of a housing shortage.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Greene Space, New York Public Radio's live performance venue. I'm Stephanie Clary, and I oversee WNYC and Gothamist Newsroom. If you are worried, you might miss the State of the Union tonight. I will assure you we will get you out of here on time. And I also want to put a plug that we are streaming it live on WNYC and our app. Yes. But it feels appropriate that we are talking about transportation and infrastructure tonight, as many of you likely navigated disruptions on our sidewalks, streets, and trains to get here. But I want to thank you for making the trip. I think tonight's discussion will make it worth it. And I'm delighted that our transportation team is collaborating with Ian Coss of the Peabody Award-winning podcast, The Big Dig, from GBH News in Boston. Many of us at WNYC are big fans of the podcast and its more recent seasons, one about the state lottery system, and the latest called, and I love saying this, Catching the Codfather, about a fishing tycoon in Massachusetts. It's a prime example of the power of local audio journalism, where we can make sense of why our cities run the way they do and re-examine history in a way that informs our future. So speaking of, if you're wondering what was playing in the speakers as you were finding your seat and walking around, it was historic audio from WNYC's archives, courtesy of the New York City Municipal Archives. It was from 75 years ago, capturing the ribbon-cutting ceremony of a section of the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. This audio was only recently digitized and hasn't even been cataloged or put online yet, so you guys got to hear that here. I'm excited that we will get to discuss the question of what to do with the BQE, which was once hailed for its modern engineering and is now something that likely keeps a lot of us in this room up at night. But before we begin, I want to quickly remind you that our work at New York Public Radio is member supported. And that support allows us to put on events like this and WNYC's archives team to preserve historic audio. Your support helps both fund our preservation of the past and keep us sustainable so we can continue to cover transportation and our city now and in the future. If you are already a member, thank you. If you haven't yet joined, I will look in your eyes and invite you to be part of this wonderful community tonight. A gift of any size is welcome. And a monthly sustainer gift gives us the stability to weather political and actual storms and the freedom to create content that lasts. There's a QR code on the screens around the room where you can learn more and join. Thank you again for coming out on this snowy evening. And now I'm thrilled to welcome Ian Coss of the Big Dig podcast.
I've got my own microphone here. Can you hear me? Nope. Here we are. So when I set up to do this highway teardown tour, I knew right away that there was one city that we absolutely had to come to, and that is New York City. It's so good to be here. So the goal for tonight is there still some sound playing? Okay, good. So the plan for tonight is I want to zero in on a 1 mile stretch of a single highway that I think is emblematic and illustrative of highway challenges around this city and around this country. This is a highway that has been in and out and in and out and in the news for a long time. And so I did a quick search of the WNYC archives for some of the recent coverage of it. And this is a little bit of what I found.
Brian Lara on WNYC. So what can be done to fix New York City's most hated mile of express?
The debate over what to do with the most crumbling part of the Brooklyn-Queens Express.
Crumbling stretch of the Brooklyn-Queens Express.
Crumbling part of the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway.
Well, at this point in the game, listeners should be familiar with the term triple cantilever.
Should they?
Should they? And that last voice in there is none other than WNYC's own transportation reporter, Stephen Nessen. I love it when you hear those back to back, you get this exact phrase, most crumbling stretch of, could we get some fresh copy maybe?
Deteriorating.
It's called a thesaurus.
Falling apart.
So I'm curious, has the term triple cantilever truly entered the New York lexicon?
I think for New York residents, yes.
So you can just drop that
although
in
to be
casual
fair,
conversation.
I would, yes. But on air, I think my editor would prefer me to explain it a little bit before I use it or after.
Mm-hmm. But it's gotten to the point where you're kind of like, nah, maybe we can just throw that in there.
Yeah.
I'm guessing this is a non-representative sample, but are we familiar? Okay. Before we get to the infamous triple cantilever, I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of a bigger picture. This is part of a larger highway called the BQE, Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. What is it? Why does it exist?
So the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway is the only major highway that can really connect all the 5 boroughs. It was built between 1937 to 1964. It's a 12-mile interstate, actually. Part of it's owned by the state. The small cantilever section is actually owned by the city.
Okay. So it's really like the BBMSQ.
It's a bit of a mouthful, that acronym. Okay. 130,000 daily vehicles, 13,000 of them are trucks.
Yeah.
So it gets traffic. Everyone in this room knows the book, The Power Broker. I'm sure it's on your shelves, whether you've completed it or not. But Robert Moses is the person responsible for building this roadway, someone who's comfortable cleaving neighborhoods, especially and particularly immigrant, Black, Latino, low income, which had to be destroyed to build this highway.
Yeah.
And part of his goal was to connect the Long Island highways he built to Manhattan, to get some of that traffic into the city, goods, workers. Obviously, you know about highways. This was the time to build them. The golden era.
Yeah, so we found some audio from the opening ribbon cutting of part of the BQE, including Robert Moses. Could you play that clip for us, just to give us a little sense of the mood in 1950?
I believe that this beautiful sunshiny day is an auspicious beginning for this great highway.
This one of the greatest city arterial routes ever launched. This is the pride and the pet of Brooklyn.
So was the Brooklyn borough president at the time calling it the pride and the pet of Brooklyn. That was the mood then. What's the mood now?
Oh, I mean, now it's, if you're stuck on it, of course, it's misery.
Do you drive the BQE yourself?
I do. I
have a favorite stretch?
It's been a long time. I think, like my children hold their breath when they drive past a graveyard, sort of hold your breath while you're driving under the triple cantilever, or on it, I guess.
Yeah. And does your car have some scars?
The shocks have been replaced so many times at this point.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, it's really easy to beat up on a road like the BQE.
Yeah.
It's ugly. It kind of it begs for it, but it also serves a purpose. So can you talk about why it is still there and why some folks want to keep it there?
Sure. So really the triple cantilever we're talking about is 0.4 miles, a minuscule part of this larger highway, really. But there's this 1.5 mile stretch that runs along a really, really nice neighborhood called Brooklyn Heights.
Yep.
Very wealthy, great apartments, classic, historical. As Moses was building this highway, he had to get through this neighborhood to connect the northern section that runs through Queens to downtown Brooklyn with the southern section from, basically, Bay Ridge, southern Brooklyn to this part.
Yeah. And that connection is key because, like you said, this was the missing link in his grand vision. right, to get you out to Long Island and Staten Island and those places.
Exactly. But unlike, some of the other neighborhoods that were completely obliterated to build this highway to keep it straight or whatever it was, that wasn't going to work in Brooklyn Heights. So as a sort of solution, I suppose, they built this very, advanced engineering structure at the time. And it was a triple cantilever sort of attached to the side of a hill. And you sort of stacked the highway, unlike in other parts of the road. And as a sort of treat or a cherry on top, they built this beautiful promenade on top.
Yeah.
Great view, great, place to look out. People get married there. Proposals are held there, all kinds of things. And that was sort of a bonus for building this sort of highway in this beautiful neighborhood.
Got it.
But over time, this was built a long time ago. It wasn't designed for the sort of current standards of vehicles that we have today. Big trucks, heavy cars, a lot more traffic than, when the roadway opened.
Got it. I think that is a perfect segue to bring out our guests for the evening. So Stephen and I, we're just two dudes who cover transportation.
Two dudes with facial hair.
Two dudes with facial hair, more hair on the bottom and then on the top, who cover transportation. But we've got with us two fantastic guests who have lived and breathed this issue for many years. We've got Polly Trottenberg, who has held many roles. Hold on, I'm going to read this. Polly Trottenberg, who has held many roles, including as Deputy Secretary of Transportation under Pete Buttigieg, but especially relevant to this conversation, she was the Commissioner of the New York City Department of Transportation from 2014 to 2020. Polly, please join us. And we've also... And also with us, we've got Lara Birnback, who is the Executive Director of the Brooklyn Heights Association that Stephen was just referencing. This is a neighborhood advocacy group that was founded in 1910, all right? And has played a historic role in many highway debates in the city. So, Lara Birnback. So, Lara, I want to start with you. Stephen offered us this sort of kind of bit of the lore of the triple cantilever. Could you talk about the role of your organization, the Brooklyn Heights Association, in the origin story of this unusual structure? How did this come about?
Sure. Can you hear me okay? Okay, so yes, in the BQE construction started, I believe, in the 30s and finally finished in 1960. But in the middle era, in the 40s, was when Robert Moses brought his plan for the BQE to Brooklyn Heights, as you referenced. And originally, the story goes, one story goes, that originally the plan would have been to run the highway along Hicks Street, and it would have taken out many, many, many 19th century historic homes, cut right through the heart of Brooklyn Heights, in the way that the highway cut through the heart of many other neighborhoods when the BQE was being constructed.
And I can't picture Hicks Street, but like brownstones?
Brownstones, brick, federal townhomes. We have we're lucky to have a really amazing collection of historic homes and buildings in Brooklyn Heights. So a variety of architectural styles, but historic homes nonetheless. So the story is that these plans, when the plans came out in the mid-40s, the neighborhood led by the Brooklyn Heights Association, which, as you noted, had already been in existence since 1910, mobilized to fight back. The Brooklyn Heights had many of its own power brokers, and they were ready to step up and fight this plan. Eventually, what happened was Moses was persuaded to change the route of the highway and build it along the Brooklyn Heights bluffs, essentially above Furman Street.
What did it look like beforehand? Was it truly a cliff?
It was a cliff, and there were
let's build a highway on the cliff.
There were homes that had beautiful back gardens that extended down the hillside.
Yeah.
So these were private gardens that belonged to the lucky homeowners of the time, and that was part of the way that the promenade or the esplanade came about. Was that as part of this compromise, those homeowners would lose their private gardens, but a beautiful public space, a beautiful public garden would be placed on top.
Got it.
There's an alternative
Okay,
story
so that's mythology
out there.
number one.
Yeah, mythology number
Give us
one. Maybe
version
not
number two.
mythology, but origin story number one.
Okay.
Origin story number two is that Moses was actually too clever by half and knew that he would face opposition in Brooklyn Heights. He was obviously not a naive guy. He knew what he would be up against in Brooklyn Heights, and that he leaked, or somehow these plans to run the highway along Hicks Street leaked, causing a great hue and cry, when in fact all along his plan had been, for reasons that he and his engineers decided were preferable, to run the highway along the bluff. That was his intention all along, but yet he allowed the neighborhood to feel like they had some sway over his plans. I don't know the truth. I don't know whether it's story one or story two, but they're both interesting to think about.
Polly, Stephen, thoughts?
I read that he
Which
sent
version?
the second version, I read that he actually sent surveyors out to very obviously look like surveyors.
Like
so
theatrical surveyors.
Yeah, like over the top. So I believe one of the local Brooklyn papers wrote about Moses's plan, and that's how it snowballed and got on folks' radar.
So, Polly, you come into office in the city. We're going to leave the mystery of the origins aside for now. 2016. So now we've
2014.
Excuse me. You come into
Can you hear
office.
me? Yeah, 2014.
You're on? Great. You come into office in 2014. So now we're many decades later. This triple cantilever with the promenade on top, these layers of highways stacked along what was once a cliff. What is the state of that whole structure when you come into office?
Yeah, and there's a little bit of more modern history, which is, as Lara was saying, BQE was sort of built in a period from the 30s through the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time you got to the early 21st century, it was in pretty poor condition. And, the deviousness of Robert Moses, he also cut corners and built, in a lot of places, pretty substandard highways. So it was substandard in its construction and its design and a lot of other things. Now, a little bit of history here. It had been, I think, conversations in New York had been happening by the point I became commissioner, probably for 20 years, about this highway starting to fall apart. Both the city and the state are spending a lot of money to maintain it. At some point, you want to do something that's going to be more cost effective and fix it. And some in this room you may even remember that the state sort of jumped into the fray in around 2010 and came in with a proposal, and it was also met with a big firestorm, a lot of interest, and potentially this was particularly focusing on the part of the BQE that's in Sunset Park and cuts off Red Hook, and why couldn't that be a tunnel? And the state essentially, I think it's fair to say, beat a hasty retreat. So when I came in, the state was not sort of interested in being part of the process. And, as we talk about the complexities of the BQE, most of the BQE, it's about 20 miles long, is owned by the state, except for the infamous section that runs between Atlantic and Sand Streets, that 1.2 miles, which is the most complicated, not just the triple cantilever, but there's a lot. Those of you who've driven over it knows the way it goes up and down and weaves, and it's an incredibly complicated piece of infrastructure. So when I came in, and it's easy to look back in hindsight and second guess yourself, but when I came in, my bridge engineers were already starting to talk to me on a pretty regular basis about their concerns about the safety of the structure and what we might need to do. And we did make our entreaties to the state to see if they wanted to be part of that discussion, and there just wasn't a lot of appetite there.
And is it really, this section is so unusual where there are these three layers, and each layer is only supported on one side, right? That's what makes it a cantilever. And so did that, cause, are there unique challenges to maintaining that kind of structure or repairing that kind of structure?
There are a lot of unique challenges to that. It's very hard to maintain. People who live near it in Brooklyn Heights know this. It's noisy because it vibrates a lot, because it's only supported on one side. It's very hard to do the work piecemeal because you can't really route traffic around it. if you think of a highway that's supported on both sides, you can maybe close one lane and get cars to go around the other side. It's really not so easy to do on a cantilever. So, and just to add to the complexity of sort of what we confronted, diving in, there are, maybe this is the deviousness of Robert Moses, there are 4 different subway lines that run under it. There's a major sewer interceptor. There's a whole bunch of other utilities. So in addition to just the sheer complexity of the engineering of the highway, there is just a bounty of other types of typical New York City infrastructure that run underneath it.
Yeah.
I can safely say this, no one in their right minds would have built something like that in a more modern era, because it is so very complicated to go back and repair.
As I understand it, the two of you, Stephen and Polly, went on tours, or maybe Polly, you were the one giving the tour.
We did.
Could you kind of set the scene of what it actually looked like inside?
100%. No, and look, as we started
That was 2018, right?
When we first started bringing plans out, and obviously a lot of folks in this room know, big political firestorm there. And one thing we decided to do, because it is almost an incomprehensibly complicated piece of infrastructure, was to start taking journalists and elected officials and community members, and by the way, an amazing crew of engineers and other folks who had deep expertise, to go and look underneath it. And we started to peel back some of the parts of the wall, which had not been peeled back.
When we say peel back, you mean like jackhammer back?
Jackhammer back. I mean, peel back.
Is it actually like hollow inside? Like you open it up and there's
parts of it are, parts of it aren't.
You can just walk around under there.
And there's weird, like old pieces of stuff back there and things that got left behind. And it's
really
just,
like old equipment that was just abandoned.
It's quite astonishing. And to go underneath it, and you can look up and see holes where the cars are drying over, and just feel the sheer kind of sound and force of the volume of traffic. I mean,
for me, right, it was like seeing the light coming through the concrete, and that didn't seem right.
and when you're transportation commissioner and you see the light coming through, and you know that structure is carrying 150,000 vehicles a day, which makes it one of the busiest highways in this entire region, it doesn't feel right either.
Right. A different kind of light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah. Not the light you want at the end of the tunnel.
Don't go towards that light.
Don't go towards the light.
Yeah, and we were told at that time, I think, every 50 feet there are joints that are leaking and damaged, and that also seemed really troubling.
Yeah, it was.
I mean, that's one way to alarm people and get people's attention, is take journalists there, show them these holes, and tell them this is a problem that you can see with your own eyes.
And I don't think, we weren't trying to alarm people, but I just think there was a lot of misunderstanding about the nature and complexity of the structure, and we just thought it would be useful for people. We didn't want people running out screaming, and we tried to reassure people that we were doing a lot of things on a day-to-day basis to maintain the structure. But I do think, to some degree, seeing it with your own eyes was just helpful in understanding the complexity of the challenge.
Yeah. Was this new to you, Stephen, at that time? Was it already on your radar?
I mean, I was relatively new to the transit beat, but I think when they said, we're doing a tour of the BQE, we're going to show you what's underneath it, I think my ears perked up, rightly so, and was like, yes, I'm going to be there.
And what I love is when you listen to those stories you did from, say, 2018, you go here and there, something has to be done by 2026. Otherwise, dire things will happen.
Right.
Here we are in 2026.
Well, I mean, to the DOT's credit, and I know Polly can talk about this, the alarm bells were rang and a lot of folks did something.
Yeah.
Not necessarily what you would think of as like, well, let's replace it or whatnot, but these short-term fixes to like extend the life of that section of the roadway.
Right.
And some of them, are in place today and seem, very effective, at least to buy some time.
Yeah.
While they come up with a different solution.
Yeah, I mean, we were fortunate, and some of the we after sort of things we first proposed met with fierce political resistance, we did form a commission. We're lucky some of the members of that commission are in the audience tonight, and it was a great group. Civic leaders, engineers, transportation thinkers, a lot of really creative people, and we did start to hash out some of the things that I think have helped extend the life of the structure, doing better monitoring, working with the state actually to improve the enforcement of overweight trucks, restriping it so that you would have a smoother traffic flow. And so there were, I think, a lot of solutions that have helped maintain the structure. Other ideas still on the table from folks today.
Yeah.
The debate right now is, can you do that? Can you keep doing that? At what point does that just start not to work? And I think that's part of the question that still remains on the table.
But there was two options floated at the time.
Yeah, indulge us in the fierce resistance part, if you're willing to relive that for a moment.
It's a little traumatic, but I'll relive it with you.
Take us back to the options.
Yeah, and I think one thing in reflection, I had sort of my bridge engineers feeling, and one thing, those of you who are engineers or work with engineers, they sign their names and certify to the safety of the things that they inspect and that they oversee. And many times in the course of my career as transportation commissioner, I would have an engineer say to me about something we were trying to do, I won't sign my name to that. And you have to take that seriously because their careers are on it. So look, I think I had a lot of bridge engineers telling me, we think the condition here is very dire. We think public safety is a question. Now, our constraint, and a constraint that I think happily got blown out of the water, our constraint was, since the state wasn't really working with us, we didn't have a corridor-wide approach. We could only focus on the piece that the city owned, which was the complicated triple cantilever Atlantic to Sands piece. And I think we knew at the time, I think it was our hope that if we talked about what the city could do, that it would spur a broader discussion. I don't think we thought our idea was the beginning and the end. I think we thought it would spur the discussion. It spurred much more than a discussion. But, it's funny, at one point, you all saw the New York Times did a series on this, and they sort of asked me the question, well, if your solution had happened, it'd be done by now. And I said, I don't think we ever really thought that it would happen like we proposed or that it would be that easy. But I do think certainly we felt urgency. And, in the end, it created a firestorm, but it also, I think, created the dialogue we needed and brought a lot of the right folks to the table and did bring creative short-term solutions. And I think now at least the state much more engaged in a longer corridor-wide solution, which is ultimately what you're going to need.
Yeah. I don't want to get lost in the nuances of the plans that were proposed, but just for folks who are not familiar, maybe Stephen, could you lay out quickly what was on the table?
So there were two options. One was to build a temporary elevated roadway at the level of this lovely promenade, which would essentially put traffic in people's backyards in Brooklyn Heights. While that's up there, they could demolish the roadway below and build another one. The other plan was to do it piece by piece, over 8 years, 24 weekends of full lane closures. Both of these would have cost, at the time, about $4 billion, and potentially could have been done close to now if they had started at that time.
So, Laura, these two plans come to you. Your organization, represents the residents along this promenade who would have to look out and listen to and follow along with this construction project. How did those plans hit you?
So I'll just to clarify, I didn't come to this role at the Brooklyn Heights Association until mid-2019. Okay, but I've been a resident of Brooklyn Heights for a long time and I was actually working for the city at the time and was following the debate as a citizen and as a neighbor very closely. Yeah. So what happened was the plans did not land well in Brooklyn Heights.
It's a lot of understatement.
There was considerable outrage. Actually, I think that's probably a good word to use at the idea. I think people certainly understood that something needed to be done. Certainly wanted to be sensitive to the idea that nobody wanted to see any kind of collapse or a piece of concrete falling onto someone. The seriousness of the situation, I don't think was dismissed. I think that was well understood by many people in the community. But I think the idea that a 6-lane highway would be built on top of the promenade, which is not just an amenity for Brooklyn Heights, it's a world-famous tourist destination for people from all over the world visiting New York City, as well as many people who live in New York just don't happen to live in Brooklyn Heights. So that would be taken out of commission for 8+ years. replaced with 6 lanes of traffic outside of your window, essentially, was unacceptable. And the other alternative didn't sound so great either. What I think, I really give credit to Commissioner Trottenberg at that time and to the de Blasio administration for trying to do something for, as you said, Polly, to really bring, it had been known long before you became commissioner that the BQE was in bad shape, that the cantilever was not in great shape. It had been a sort of political football for a long time. So I give a lot of credit to that administration for saying, okay, enough is enough. We need to finally address this. It just was, the solutions at that time were less than ideal. And I also want to credit the mayor's expert panel, the BQE panel that you referred to, with really helping me and the Brooklyn Heights community, and I think many others in the city, understand that this was not just a problem of the triple cantilever, that the BQE is a scar across Brooklyn and Queens, and that many neighborhoods adjacent to the corridor have suffered, in fact, far more greatly than those of us in Brooklyn Heights, and that it would be a mistake to address the cantilever without looking at the corridor in a much more holistic way.
Yeah. Could you set the scene a little bit of the public meetings that took place and the community organizing that took place around this? Kind of take us in there.
You really want to go back to the trauma, right?
One moment longer, and then we'll move on.
I mean, it was
for someone like me who doesn't, who wasn't there, doesn't follow. I want to understand what that moment meant.
The BHA, as the representatives of the neighborhood, quickly mobilized. There was also another group that formed at the time. They were called The Better Way. There was another group of Brooklyn Heights residents and concerned neighbors, along with others in the neighborhood who really were interested in organizing around this. So there were, there was an event on the promenade. There was a town hall meeting that was organized that had a lot of, we happened to be in an election year, mayoral, and I believe maybe city council, but for sure a mayoral election year. So it was advantageous in a way for us because many of the candidates who were interested in taking that office were aware of this debate and wanted to get in front of a community that is vote rich. And so we had a number of them come to a town hall that we had organized. The BHA at that time, similar to what we did, I think, when Moses was originally building the highway, we tried to put forward an alternative plan of our own. We had commissioned a local architect, Mark Wooters, who developed a bypass highway. One of the reasons we did that was because we felt like it was important not just to say no to something, but to try to come up with an alternative that would potentially be more palatable.
Yeah.
I think our thinking and the conversation about the BQA as a whole has evolved a lot since that time. So at this point, that's not a plan that we would put forward. But at the time, it was an important way for us to demonstrate that there are other possibilities out there besides the two plans that the DOT had come up with.
Yeah.
I think, to sort of follow on from that, I think what Lara's referring to, and it's interesting how the politics played out, which is for a long time the debate was solely around the triple cantilever. And there was Mark Wooters' plans, there was an architectural group that came in with a whole reimagining of Brooklyn Bridge Park, because one of the complexities here was this could have been fixed perhaps while Brooklyn Bridge Park was being built. And these plans were very elaborate, very expensive, and only focused on sort of the section near Brooklyn Heights. And so, there was that political debate going on, but then the political debate started to expand as communities on other parts of the corridor sort of said, well, now you're talking about spending $10 billion just for Brooklyn Heights, but what about us? And that sort of expanded the debate to, once again, we need the state at the table because this is a corridor-wide challenge, and also asking the question of how much are we investing in mitigating on this? If, hey, New York City, if you had $10 billion to spend on transportation or anything else, and you were concerned about equity and other things, how would you spend it? So as I would say, sort of the localized protests started to grow into, I think, thornier questions that involved, you know, the other neighborhoods that had been flattened by the BQE, and even larger questions about New York City. If you have this amount of money to invest in transportation, is this what you're spending it on, or are you spending on expanding the subway system or buses or other things like that?
Right.
Yeah.
So it quickly grew. It quickly grew from a hotspot debate, a fierce one, to something that got much bigger and even more complicated and required, I think, a lot more players to begin to solve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was really struck, Polly. I came across a quote of yours from one of those meetings at that time where you really laid it out. You're like, you may hate what I'm bringing to you here, but there is no option that everyone's going to love, and I'm sorry about that. I don't have the exact quote, but it was pretty close to that.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And it was very blunt for a public official to come out and say, sorry, I don't have a perfect solution for you. Could you kind of put me in your head at that time of what you were trying to communicate about the project?
I think as a public official, particularly in transportation, you communicate that all the time. I mean, you're usually, a lot of the projects that you're involved in, they involve tough trade-offs. Once in a while you have a project in which everybody winds up happy, but that's, you know, in New York City where street space is fiercely contested, where there are a lot of competing interests and factions, you're frequently having to come to folks and say, here's what we're going to propose, not everybody's going to love it. You know, here are the ways we're going to try and bring everybody into the process and do the best we can. So that's not uncommon in this line of work, I would say.
One of the things that strikes me about the BQE and other kind of road issues like this is that they kind of go through these cycles where it'll really heat up and there'll be a lot of ideas floating around and debates and meetings, and then it'll sort of simmer down and go into the background. So in that 2018, 2019 period, there was obviously a lot going on. What kind of quieted it? What was the signal?
COVID.
Well, COVID, yes. I think, again, sort of having a panel and saying we're taking the options that everyone's the most angry off the table. We're going to take a fresh look. We're going to look at some ways that we can, some of the steps that we're taking to preserve the structure. Yeah. So we'll have more time to work through it. And, one thing I just wanted to note at that time, something that I thought was a great idea was the creation of, as you have here in New York, like the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, different types of authorities. I really felt that would have been so helpful for the BQE, just very hard for the city to solve on its own in the envelope of the part of the roadway that the city owned. And I remember at that time, Assemblywoman Joanne Simon had a piece of legislation up in Albany. It was going to create a BQE commission. I don't remember exactly the title. That would have brought the city, the state, Parks Department, MTA, Port Authority, all the players, Brooklyn Bridge Park, all the players that could help produce that larger solution that people got interested in. We can reduce truck traffic. Can we put more traffic on the water? Can we bring more mass transit service? All those things which are way beyond the city's capabilities, but could be part of a commission that brought in all the right agencies. And I still think to this day that would be a great solution to help even now think through all the ways that you could tackle the corridor.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's not just even that corridor. I mean, some of the things you want to do to tackle the corridor are larger questions about, in an era where everyone's getting things delivered, and how do we manage truck traffic in New York City? How do we continue to expand our mass transit system, in an era when we have fiscal constraints?
So Laura mentioned COVID as sort of this signal that the debate was over for the time. For you, Polly, was there another moment when you felt like, okay, it's time to withdraw these plans we've been pushing? And
well, I think we withdrew them pretty quickly. So, I mean, that sort of happened almost overnight, I'd say.
Was that disappointing?
No, I mean, contrary to what people believe, I was not particularly wedded to any particular idea. I think we did feel like we needed to get the debate started, but no, not disappointing in the slightest. And I really enjoyed the opportunity to have a commission that brought a lot of great thinkers to the table. I never pretended that I thought the city had all the answers on it. I don't think the city does to this day. And it's interesting to me, we had people say, it's a new administration, what's this mayor going to do? Mm-hmm. The challenge is much bigger than for the mayor. It requires state actors and other agencies and a lot of players, I think.
Do you regret not pushing harder in that moment?
No, I don't think it was possible.
So, Stephen, could you catch us up to the present a little bit? It's been now, so that was in 2018, 2019. What has happened since then?
Well, a couple years ago, Mayor Adams and his administration presented a series of ideas for how to deal with the triple cantilever. And it's actually staggering. When I went back to look and I asked the DOT, they said they've presented 40 design concepts for how to deal with this part of the roadway.
Just for that one stretch?
Which I can't even get my head around, but it's a lot. But so they do all these workshops. They've done 19 public meetings with folks, trying to come up with some, more inclusive, bringing ideas from the community. And they sort of come up with these fun names for different designs.
Okay.
One's called the Stoop. Another's called the Terraces. Another one's called the Lookout. And for each one of these, there's also 3 variations of how it would work and either connect to Brooklyn Bridge Park or not. What to do with ostensibly the biggest problem is the traffic, right?
Right.
So are you going to have the vehicles stacked on top of each other? Are they going to be horizontally aligned? And there's multiple variations for each of those configurations that they've presented to the public, which I'm not sure how anyone in the public quite gets their mind around or chooses, I like that one or that one.
Well, that's your job. Right?
My job is to look at it and try to understand it, but it's even a lot for me to get my head around, and I'm still looking at it.
Yeah. How do you, as a reporter covering this, how do you decide what to take seriously?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I take public officials seriously. I go to the meetings, listen to what they have to say, and I check in with the important stakeholders who have a better grasp and history in this material than I do.
Yeah.
People like
I ask
Lara
because
and others.
My sense in following projects like this is that in the ideation phase, there's just a huge influx of ideas coming from community groups, coming from the state, coming from the city, and they all sound compelling and interesting. And so I'm curious, do you have folks you call like engineers or experts in the field to kind of help, or do you get into the weeds and trying to review these plans yourself? Because it's a lot to process.
To a certain extent, I'll check with some of the experts in this room, call them, text them, get their thoughts on it. I mean, there was one that I think folks remember involved building a tunnel from, right through downtown Brooklyn.
Now you're speaking my language
right
here.
Through Park Slope, which I think Park Slope would not be a fan of. But do we take that seriously as a contender? Check in with the experts and see what they say.
So, Polly, I'm curious for you, looking ahead at this next chapter, the new administration, the challenges ahead, what are the lessons you take from your time in office that you feel are relevant now?
I mean, and I'll take the second just to broaden the lens, because also I'm just coming, as you noted, recently from the Biden administration, and I got to I'm very familiar with the Big Dig, but I'm familiar with a lot of these projects all over the country.
Yeah.
And I've said this many times publicly, I'll say it again, none are as complicated or difficult as the BQE. That is really in a class by itself. But
that's not just New York exceptionalism.
It's not New York exceptionalism, and that wouldn't be a good thing to brag about anyways. But a lot of them are pretty difficult, and they have some commonalities. And I think New York example is in some ways the most heartbreaking, right? Which is, in so many of these cases, neighborhoods were just, the way I've heard it described, they were clear-cut. And if you see the documentary about the BQE, I mean, it basically, Moses clear cuts through Williamsburg like it's a forest. And the devastation and the impact is incredibly complicated. And many decades later, it's very hard in a lot of cases to fix. Just the costs, the complexity, and finding the consensus. And often, again, that governance question comes into question. In a lot of places, these are state highways. It's unusual in the case of New York that this small part of it, the hardest part of it, is owned by the city. But in most other instances, these are state interstates, but the impacts are felt locally. And just to remind everybody, these were largely, as was mentioned, Black communities, immigrant communities, low-income communities that were devastated. And just the politics, the summoning of the political consensus, and the resources just make them incredibly challenging. And you need to pull all that together. And I was happy in the Biden administration, we had a couple of programs, one called Reconnecting Communities and one called Neighborhood Access and Equity, that actually put some federal dollars on the table. And that's, I think, just tremendously incentivizing and helpful if there's a lot of fraction and conflict and difficult questions about how to fix some of these roadways. Bringing some federal dollars to the table can help bring folks together. I'm hoping that those programs are a little bit in flux at the moment under the current administration, but I think in the long run, it is also important to have a federal partnership and to have those resources as well.
Did that experience of going around the country and going to Detroit or New Orleans, Rochester, did that change how you see the BQE? Did you come to appreciate the challenges in a different way?
I think it reconfirmed for me just how hard the BQE is. And you mentioned Rochester. Which is, I think, a good example. My father's hometown, and just in some cases in these upstate New York, Rochester and Syracuse, you had these highways, they were often trenches. So from an engineering point of view, somewhat easier to deck over than to deal with something like a triple cantilever. And in a lot of cases, they were disgustingly overbuilt. So they flattened this neighborhood and built whatever, an 8-lane highway, and then the traffic didn't come. The complexity here is the BQE is a huge volume of traffic, and not that that's an insurmountable problem, but it's not so easy to just necessarily say, well, without doing a lot of the other things that have been talked about, it's harder to manage that. So, but I do think there's a commonality that I've seen in a lot of places around the country: fierce political opposition, very hard to achieve consensus, litigation, conflicts between city and state. I mean, these are I think commonalities, and this is among the sort of tragic legacies of the interstate era and the damage that it did to so many communities. It's left not only sort of physical scars, but it's just left political and governance and community questions that are also scars in their own way.
Yeah, there's a tragedy to the way that you can have these groups of people who all hate the highway, who are at the same time bitterly divided about it. And that, as you said, the legacy is, this is now feels a little cheesy to say, but it divides communities, the highway, but it also it creates this divisive, physical remnant that we all have to contend with and that pits us against each other.
I think that's completely accurate, and just also a haunting reminder for all of us that do transportation. These investments last for decades, and cities and communities adapt and grow around them. And so, mistakes at that scale are profoundly difficult to fix. They can be fixed, and communities around the country are doing it. And I think did it in Boston. It's not a good analogy to New York, because one difference in the Big Dig.
Because Boston's not New York, I know.
No, it's not that. I'm born in Boston. I'm not being snobby about it, but just one.
No, we have our own exceptionalism.
Just one big difference that I think is not the part of the dialogue here in New York. That's not well known. I mean, the Big Dig project in Boston vastly expanded the highway network.
Right.
In Boston.
First and foremost, a highway expansion project.
Here in New York, we're trying to, I think, aim for something much more difficult, which is to take a very high volume highway and reduce capacity. And it's not that it can't be done, but it's much more challenging than either a project where you vastly expand the roadway network, or again, in the case of like a Rochester, where the highway was overbuilt and you can shrink it back down to a surface road without big impacts.
I have a couple reflections
Please.
on what the discussion has been. I'll go back really briefly to this period when I said COVID. So we had the expert panel report come out that really was influential in helping the Brooklyn Heights community, as I said, think about the entirety of the BQE. So it was shortly after that report came out, which I want to say it was the end of January 2020, right? So March 2020 is when COVID hits all of us, and obviously the city and the state have other priorities at the time. But we continued to work behind the scenes. And one of the things that we did was to start reaching out to our neighbor sister communities up and down the corridor that we knew had been impacted by the BQE and that were thinking about the BQE. So, for example, there's an organization, El Puente in Williamsburg, in Southside Williamsburg, which had done a lot of work thinking about the BQE even before this, even before the debate about the cantilever came to be. They had worked very hard for 10 years on a community vision for capping the trench in Williamsburg. It was called the BQ Greene. So we were fascinated by this, wanted to learn more about it, reached out and said, hey, we know you're struggling with the BQE. We're struggling with the BQE. Can we talk to each other? Can we find out, can we learn about the situation in each other's neighborhoods? So we started with that. We worked on that. We worked with Assemblywoman Simon to try to help her advance that BQE authority bill that we talked about. But the outreach to the other neighborhoods continued to the point where now there is a really fantastic coalition called the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway Environmental Justice Coalition. So we have members, community groups, citywide transportation groups like Riders Alliance. We have groups like the BHA, El Puente, Uprose in Sunset Park, Red Hook Initiative. And the point about the division between different communities who all hate the BQE, certainly we are a lot of groups that aren't agree on everything. Mm-hmm. But we have come together to say, enough is enough with the BQE. It impacts all of us in a terrible way, as I said, much more so in many of these frontline neighborhoods, frontline communities than in my own neighborhood. And we're stronger together. We know that the powers that be frequently try to pit us against each other, or we're our own worst enemies and we pit ourselves against each other. Yeah. But let's really try to overcome that and work together. So that's work that I'm really proud of and really excited for, because I think that's the momentum and the unity that we need to make a different choice about the BQE going forward.
Yeah. Are there lessons you took, Laura, from that really kind of heated period we were talking about how to be a more constructive and productive community advocate? Like, does your organization approach the issue differently?
It's a good question. I think we approach the issue differently because we are no longer looking at the cantilever, without looking at the rest of the corridor. So what was probably at the time a fairly narrow or parochial vision, responding to the problem as it was laid out for us. The problem as it was laid out for us in the community was the cantilever is structurally unsound. What are we going to do about the cantilever? Mm-hmm. So that's how we responded initially. What should we do about the cantilever? How is this going to impact Brooklyn Heights? But I think fairly quickly we started to connect the dots and to see that it really wasn't only about the cantilever. Certainly, the cantilever is problematic, and we need to do something about it. But it's a much larger question. It's a much wider topic. It's complex. Obviously, I don't think anyone is under the illusion that we could wave a magic wand or that there's a silver bullet. I think, having been to a number of community meetings about the BQE now, both under the de Blasio administration and under the Adams administration, I think that one of the reasons that everybody comes away so frustrated, the city would say, we had 19, I think, Stephen, you said, we had 19 community meetings. We've talked to the community. It's like, yes, those meetings were held and people did come, although there were times when it felt like there were more DOT staff and consultants than actual residents of the neighborhoods. But one of the problems, I think, is that the public has not been presented presented with the problem in a way that helps people to understand what the trade-offs are. I think people are mature enough, most people are mature enough to understand that policy choices have trade-offs and that there's not going to be one perfect solution that's going to make everybody happy. But it is not often presented to us in a way that if we did X, Y, or Z, here are the things that would result that you all might think are really positive, but here are some of the drawbacks.
Right.
If we did option B, we would have these advantages and these disadvantages. And to allow people to wrestle with the trade-offs, to bring their own values to the table, because the community we are not transportation experts, we are not engineers, we are not going to be able to weigh in on the weedy aspects of the project, but we do know our values and we do know our neighborhoods, and we have to be given a chance to really relate to the proposed solutions on those terms.
This is maybe a weighty question, but on what you're saying, do you feel like there is such thing as too much community involvement?
I know why you're asking that question. I understand some of the debates that are out in the ether about abundance and why projects don't happen, and the environmental review process and critiques of that. So I do understand that. I think I would say that it's not the quantity of the engagement, it's the quality. That's what I was trying to get at with what I was just saying, right?
Yeah.
It's not how many meetings are you having or how many residents have you given a survey to who maybe don't even really understand the survey that they're taking. You know, even as Stephen noted, he's a transportation reporter, and he struggled, as I did, to understand some of these 40 different options and plans that were laid out in one public meeting, and to come up with some kind of comprehensive understanding of, well, I think I like this, but I don't really understand what the impacts are. We never really had a chance to hear about we asked many times, we want to understand what this would mean for the air quality in our neighborhoods. We want to reduce vehicle miles traveled. How do these plans respond to the demands from the community for a less car-intensive city? The communities that live along the BQE have the highest rates of asthma in all of Brooklyn. How do these proposed plans respond to that? How does this respond to the climate pledges that the state and the city have gotten involved in? And we didn't really have any answers to those questions. So it's frustrating for the powers that be, for the decision makers who are holding these town halls and feel like they just get yelled at. And it's frustrating for the community who feels like we're not speaking the same language, and we're trying to solve different issues. You're trying to solve the problem of how to continue as much throughput as possible on the BQE so everybody can get their goods from Amazon and single occupancy vehicles can drive to their heart's content. But we're trying to solve the problem of how to have better public health outcomes, how to have better climate outcomes, how to invest in public transit. So it's a little bit of talking at cross purposes.
Yeah. Polly, how do you think an ultimate decision should be made? Who makes it? What factors should be front of mind? And how do you ultimately resolve all those somewhat compatible, somewhat incompatible desires for this road?
It's a heavy question, and I'm not sure. I can't say I succeeded at it. I want to respond a little bit to what Lara said, because having in my own time done 1 million meetings, a big panel, a lot of town halls, brought in architects and engineers and experts. I mean, I think we did try to engage. I think you're raising something, though, that makes this complicated. You're saying, well, we go to these meetings and no one talks about how they're going to add more transit. Well, that's true, because the MTA isn't at the table. And so I think it's a little unfair in some cases to be, I'm mad at the city because they're not explaining how we're going to get more subway service. That's, again, why I sort of feel like you need a commission that's going to bring all those players together, because to the extent that the community is frustrated that the things that they want to hear about are not in the purview of the agencies. And that was my problem at New York City DOT. I didn't control the subways. I don't control freight movements on the water. There are a bunch of things I don't control. You have to demand that the right people are part of the process, and just, it isn't easy to be the official there saying, I'm sorry, I would love to expand the subway system too. But, I can't, I also want to make sure the roadway doesn't collapse. And, I'm sort of caught between those two things. Look, I don't know that I have the perfect answer about how to decide it. And I don't think there's too much public input. I think it's such a complicated problem.
Yeah.
You need that continually. And I agree with Lara. It was a great development, I think, for Brooklyn Heights and the neighboring communities.
And I don't ask that as an implicit criticism. I was honestly curious.
I think, again, as I've said about a lot of these, they now have just some governance conflicts.
Yeah.
And you need to resolve them. So many of these old highways, the most dramatic impacts are on local communities.
Right.
And as Lara's pointing out, and I see this in other cities, and it's not just one local community. It could be 5 different neighborhoods, could be 10 different neighborhoods. They don't all necessarily have the same vision. One interesting thing that I saw in different parts of the country is, and this is sometimes, this is a discussion that I know had happened when I was commissioner in Sunset Park. We want to improve the transportation infrastructure, but we're also worried about gentrification and displacement. These debates can get very complicated. To me, this is a governance question. You need the right players. You need an entity that can bring those players together to answer the comprehensive questions that the community has, and has some power to, after all that input, to make some decisions, and has the resources to do it. I mean, that is sort of the Port Authority model. And the Port Authority model, there's lots of things we can like about it and things we can criticize about it, but that's, an entity of that sort of heft.
Yeah.
I think can help corral some of the players that I understand. Believe me, I was in the rooms where people are like, we want more subway service, and I'm like, I do too. But it's not in my, I can't deliver that. But an entity that could deliver those things in a comprehensive way, I think would be what you need maybe to get the kind of solution that I think everyone along the corridor wants, and that is right for New York City.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that seems to be such a big theme running through so many of these what to do with the old highway debates, is that it's a regional transportation question that at some point has to be resolved at a very micro level, and it has to be resolved at all these different levels. And unfortunately, the governance, as you say, is not set up to really step back and look at one big pot of money. This was true in the Big Dig too, where people wanted to add more transit, and there were all these other ideas, and the state was like, well, we have this pot of money from the gas tax that's earmarked for the federal interstate highway program, and there's always those constraints around who has the jurisdiction to do what, who has the money to do what, and this seems like it's just caught right in the nexus of that.
But in the long run of the Big Dig, there was extensions to the Greene line. I mean, because it actually in the end was a state project, the state had a much more sort of comprehensive ownership over the different components. Here in the New York context, the city does not have that same. The city doesn't control big portions of the highway. The city doesn't run the MTA. The city doesn't run the Port Authority. So, I mean, in some ways in Massachusetts, the state had much more centralized authority to manage all the different questions than the city does here.
Could any of you imagine a New York City without the BQE?
I imagine it every day. No, for real. I imagine it every day. I don't pretend or imagine that it would be easy or simple or uncomplicated or not crazy difficult, but I do think that it's possible, and I think that it's a choice. It is a choice that we can make. We can choose to do hard things. Maybe that sounds, facile. I'm really not a Pollyanna type of person. You can ask my husband, who's here somewhere in the room. I am not a dreamer in that grand sense. But having worked on the BQE now for 7 or 8 years, having investigated what is possible in what has been possible in other cities around the world, in New York State. Having talked with a number of, co-advocates along the highway, I think it is possible. I think that we could do so much with all of the land, frankly, that's used right now for highway interchanges and flyovers and exits and on-ramps. I mean, we have a terrible housing crisis. We need more housing. We need more green space. We need to respond to climate challenges. We need more public transportation. And I'm fine to have a road. Sure, let's have a road on the right-of-way where the BQE is now. Let's fill in the trenches. Let's take down the elevated sections. It's possible. We just have to choose it. And I 100% agree with the idea that the governance is key and that we need a multi-stakeholder effort, and absolutely understand the frustration of being asked to solve a problem that is not within your jurisdiction. That's not possible and it's not fair. So we need to bring all these players to the table. And again, I know that's not easy. I know our city and our state don't always like to play nicely in the sandbox, but it's possible.
Yeah, I will just add one thought to it, and I agree. Anything is possible. If you go back to the history of the interstate era, and New York's a little quirky because we actually built parts of our interstate prior to the big Federal Aid Highway Act. But remember, and New York is famous, Mayor LaGuardia, we were famous for getting federal dollars, but remember the bargain was that the federal government paid 90% of the cost. Well, by the way, starving mass transit systems all over the country, including here in New York. And it was an astonishing influx of federal dollars. There's been a bunch of different estimates about what it means in contemporary dollars, but hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. And so just an investment, a federal investment of that side, and what it did to, in some ways, to tie our country together and produce, economic gains, and other ways destroy parts of cities in lasting ways. But just the sheer magnitude of the investment in federal dollars, to me, says to do something big like that. And the Big Dig is the example of that, which turned out to be, I think, a $15 billion project with a big chunk of federal dollars. Part of the answer for these things that were really driven at the federal level and largely paid for by federal dollars is the federal government also needs to be a partner. It's hard even for a city and a state as rich as New York to come up, I think, with the kind of resources that would be entirely, if you picture the 20 miles of the BQE, and those of you who know the city can picture it, to completely deck it over and fix everything and do all those things, it would be a much bigger project even than the Big Dig. And the Big Dig was only possible because, I think, of the federal dollars. So the federal government, I think, for some of the biggest dreams, you would want to have as a partner. And again, I was happy to be part of an administration that was starting to have some of those partnerships around the country. And I hope, with more, maybe in more politically favorable times, the federal government will want to come to the table again.
What if we don't have that much time?
Well, thank goodness I'm not the commissioner anymore.
I think
the mic drop moment.
I think we should take a few questions from the audience for the not Commissioner of Transportation of New York City and the whole panel. So we've got 2 microphones, Ryan over here and Bobby over here. So if I will call on people, please wait until the microphone has gotten to you so that everybody can hear you. Right here.
So you've all identified some ways in which the engagement doesn't match the real issue, and that there's like bigger picture challenges that can't be dealt with at the project level, especially for the former commissioner, Commissioner Trottenberg. Like, given current governance structures and at the federal level, like, where should activist organizations go? Like, where would you send them? It's like, I can't change these structures, so please go over to this person or this process to change them.
I mean, I do think first stop is Albany. And again, we mentioned at the time when all this conflict was happening, credit to Assemblywoman Joanne Simon, who really stepped in, I think, to be a great force of conciliation and moderation, and made this very proposal. And I have not followed, I've been down in Washington, I haven't followed kind of the legislative journey up in Albany, but to me, I do think that would be a great place to go next.
Yeah, I think we did see during the Adams administration that it appeared as if the state was more willing to at least engage a little bit in conversations around the BQE. I can't say that they came with a full-throated endorsement of a corridor-wide visioning process for the BQE, which is ultimately what I think we'd like to see. But they were a little bit more willing to engage. I think, we have the support of many. I can only speak for the local elected officials that represent Brooklyn Heights. We have a council member, Ressler, who is very, very engaged in the question of the BQE, working very closely with the community. Our state senator, Andrew Gennardis, is also very engaged. Assemblymember Simon is still in office and supports. So, we have those allies, and I think they are doing what they can in Albany. But it's been a difficult. I will say it's been a little bit of a difficult nut for us to crack, the state involvement. So I think a broader governance structure, again, I know we sound a little bit like a broken record, but I do think that would be one of the most crucial things we could do at this point.
Other questions? Over here in the far corner. Sorry, I've had my back to you this whole time.
Okay. So it seems decently unique in the highway system that the city owns that stretch. So I'm just curious, what is the reason for that, and how did that start, if you know?
It's a little bit lost in the mist of time. I certainly tried to understand it more deeply when I was commissioner. Those of you who know the history of Robert Moses, at one time he had like 14 different job titles, both city and state. And so his empire spanned both city and state and Tribal Ridge and Tunnel Authority. He was, again, the power broker and someone who amassed incredible power and influence at all levels of government. And it's a little bit lost in the mist of time, but at some point, maybe one of our audience members might know the answer to that.
But he just assigned that 1 point whatever mile chunk to the city.
Yeah, and just for the record, there are all around New York City little anomalous pieces of roadway that should belong to the state but belong to the city, or should belong to the city that belong to the state. And it's a bit of a complicated patchwork, and for the purposes of, as Lara's saying, a corridor-wide solution, a real barrier to finding comprehensive solutions.
Do you think it's a coincidence that it is the most complicated, tricky portion that he left to the city? Like, good luck with this.
We have another former commissioner here, Hank Gutman, who's an expert.
Okay, hold
this.
on. We got to get a mic up here.
I think Hank needs a mic.
Could you introduce yourself, too,
I'm
please?
sorry, Hank Gutman. I had the honor of succeeding Polly when she moved to Washington to protect the Republic. And I would second her comment. Thank God I'm no longer commissioner. But what I was told was that after every New York governor from Mario Cuomo forward had looked at and passed on the ability to fix the cantilever, Andrew Cuomo, having gone through exactly the same exercise when he was governor, said, forget it, I'm giving it to the city. So it wasn't a coincidence. And this may just be an origin story that I can't vouch for. I wasn't there. But what I was told was that Andrew Cuomo decided he was tired of holding the bag on this, and he would hand it off to the city of New York.
Interesting.
Lucky us.
We can still call him.
That's right. We could still verify. One in the back there, yes.
Hi. This may be a difficult question for anyone to answer definitively, but I'm just curious what your take might be. Having lived in New York City for a long time and knowing politics and money and the federal context and all of that, my sad assumption is that what will prompt action is that someone will be killed by something falling off the BQE or some other calamity, just given the state of things and kind of the paralysis that you guys have all talked about. So that will force action to happen. And I'm just curious if any of you have a take on like what would happen if that happens, because then something has to happen and it won't be done in a planful or commission-led sort of way.
I mean, I think I'll say something positive about all the activity that has happened, drama and conflict included. I think it has, as Lara was saying, it has brought a lot of ideas to the table, including some to continue to maintain the structure and monitor it. Like every inch of the BQE has got monitors on it right now. So there is, I think, a very close monitoring of the structure. And I really hope and pray for all of us that if parts of it really start to fail, the monitors will tell us that, and there will be an ability to, if need be, close parts off, do emergency repairs, et cetera. And the city has been doing, it started when I was commissioner, has been doing a series of repairs looking at sort of the worst panels and doing fixes. So I think we can really hope that the city and the state, for the state's portions, will be managing to nothing catastrophic happening. And we see this often in transportation and in other fields, that it's a tragedy that spurs action. I really hope that's not the case here. I think, as you're hearing from the most directed leaders from the community, no one wishes that, and everyone wishes we'll find a consensual solution before it comes to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as Polly stated, the city has been doing a lot of work, actually, to replace and repair some of the most corroded structures. You know, at the end of the de Blasio administration, a plan was put forward with former Commissioner Gutman to do a series of short-term repairs, 15, 20-year repairs. Waterproofing was one of them. Replacing some of the deck spans. You know, there were a number of options that were outlined. We at the BHA were very supportive of that idea, and we remain supportive of that idea. In fact, that's, if you said, you know, what would you like to see happen with the BQE, I would say immediate, serious repairs that will extend the life of the cantilever for 10, 15, 20 years, let's say. And at the same time, embark on a corridor-wide reimagining, re-envisioning process, right? So they have to go together. We have to keep the structure safe. We have to do what's necessary there. Not the 100-year solution, right, where we're sort of cementing this forever and always, which is what we felt the Adams administration was proposing, which would also, by the way, lock in or prevent the other communities in the north and the south of the Triple Cantilever from doing something transformative in their sections. So we would say do the robust short-term repairs and embark on this long-term visioning process.
There's an interesting tension there between we want the time to do the comprehensive look, but as you pointed out with your question, so often with these highway projects, it is the forcing. There's a forcing event, you know, whether it's in Seattle, it was an earthquake, you know, that forced, you know, the conversation on the Alaskan Way Viaduct. Same in San Francisco with the Embarcadero. And you can see this in other places where sometimes it does take a jolt. And so it's like you want the time and obviously none of us wants a tragedy on the BQE, but it's like you want the urgency and pressure and you want the luxury of time. Ideally, you want those things somehow working in concert. All right, enough said on that.
You do.
You've had your hand up for a while right here.
Thank you. Thank you all. So my understanding with the BQE is that the urgency was also mostly because of the size and scale of freight. And so as semi-trucks have gotten larger and larger, of course, we have weight and motion now. So how does that kind of interact in its own kind of way as kind of congestion pricing? Where has that freight gone? How do you divert more of that freight? And is there actually a way of essentially making that section of the BQE vestigial so that you can turn it into a damn hanging gardens as far as I'm concerned? But how do you kind of incorporate the rest of the diversion of what is going on it now, so that is there a future in which it is not necessary to make a replacement in kind, essentially, where it's very difficult to do so?
I mean, I think this is one of the great questions that the expert panel and mayors, governors, and transportation commissioners have grappled with now for decades. And I think we were able, again, thanks to, I want to shout out a colleague of mine now at NYU, Dr. Khan Osbey at Tandon School of Engineering, who really helped the city up our game in terms of weight monitoring and legislation up in Albany to really go after the illegal overweight trucks, which was a big step forward, and I think will do a lot to help preserve the structure. And then there have been, again, that you start to get into more expansive discussions of why do we have truck traffic? Can we put more of it on the water? Are there other solutions? That starts to get complicated, and I think you need to bring in other players. And this is an interesting question for all of us in this city. It's something I saw as I was commissioner, and it only continued to accelerate post-COVID. A lot of folks, I don't own a car, I don't need a car. And I'll say, well, how many times a day is Amazon coming to your building? And the numbers have gone like this. So we have to reconcile, the commerce and the delivery and the goods we want and need in the city with how we have a transportation system that can deliver them. Well, I think addressing the very things you're talking about, air quality, environmental impacts, all the things that go with that. It's not easy. It's not easy to grapple with those. One thing we started to do when I was commissioner, and you can see them on the streets, it's not easy for them in the snow, is to try and encourage, for example, moving from larger trucks to smaller trucks, the little Amazon delivery trucks you see that are pedals. There are a lot of ways you can start to chip away at that challenge, but you are chipping away at a challenge that is growing. The volume of package and deliveries and freight continue to grow. So you've got to not only slow the curve, but if you want to start to move it in the other direction, get aggressive and creative with your solutions.
My understanding, too, though, is congestion pricing has had a big dent in it. Trucks have altered their delivery schedules to avoid the higher daytime fee. But I don't know the impact on
pricing is a wonderfully powerful tool. And one thing we didn't have we were certainly talking about it back in the 2018 period. Obviously, we hadn't had it yet. Now that we have it here in New York, and it's been an incredible success, I think there are a lot of powerful lessons to be learned there about how you can bring pricing and those financial incentives into this question as well.
Yeah, just a few quick comments. The pricing and the trucking, there are a lot of trucks on the BQE that are not stopping in Brooklyn or Queens, right? There are a lot of trucks that are starting out in New Jersey or elsewhere, Long Island, and are trying to go to New England, and they're toll shopping. Because they don't face tolls on the BQE the way they might with other routes. So certainly the local deliveries 100% agree is an issue, and that is something that we all do have to grapple with and reckon with. But there is a portion of trucks, probably somebody here knows, which is just using the BQE as a cut through, right? So we're suffering the pollution and the noise and everything else for goods that aren't even coming to us here locally. So that I think that's something to look at. The other thing I just want to note is that definitely freight is a huge piece of this equation. It gets talked about quite a bit, as it should. But again, somebody will correct me, I think, if I'm wrong. I want to say that something like trucking and freight is 10% of the traffic on the BQE. So that means there's a lot of cars, a lot of single occupancy vehicles driving on the BQE, right? So clearly we have to do something about trucks. That's a huge issue. But I would argue that we also need to think about reducing our car dependence. And why are those drivers on the BQE? Is it because they live in a transit desert? Is it because it's 20 minutes faster for them? I don't know. There's probably a plethora of reasons to understand that issue. But I feel like that gets overlooked a little bit in the conversation on the BQE, and so I just wanted to raise it.
We have time for one more question.
So I don't really know how to phrase this intelligently, but I guess the way I think about it is that urban freeways are bad and we should tear them down. And if maybe the BQE didn't exist today, we'd never imagine building it. So I guess I'm just curious, I guess it's mostly to the former commissioner, but why wasn't it at least one of the proposals? You know, like we're kind of throwing everything at the wall. And so why isn't it at least one of the proposals to like, you know, just remove this section?
Yeah, and remember, as we started out this discussion, the BQE, and yet we can get into sort of the different types of traffic on the highway, but it's 150,000 vehicles a day. And it is true, 10% of those are trucks, but that means 15,000 trucks, which are big and heavy and noisy and cause, obviously, all kinds of environmental impacts. And there are places, and you know, famously, like the Embarcadero in San Francisco is one, and one could argue to some degree the West Side Highway right here in Manhattan, where the road came down and the traffic was absorbed pretty easily. I've not really found an expert, and for what it's worth, who has told me that they think that volume of vehicles in that particular terrain of Brooklyn, and a lot of the other places where the roadways come down, there may be another roadway that parallels it. I think, as you're hearing from Lara, the other roadway that parallels it is really the New Jersey Turnpike. There's not another sort of easy diversion for that volume of traffic. And that's why I think there has been this discussion about, understandably, how can we reduce that volume? Through tolls, through better freight management, through better mass transit. I think there is some recognition that it would be hard to just absorb that much traffic overnight on the streets of Brooklyn. People can disagree about that, but I guess I sort of came down, and again, looking at a lot of the other highways around the country where this was done, where traffic volumes were much, much lower, and there were more parallel routes that could carry some of the volume. So I think that's the debate. Not everyone agrees on it, and people can certainly have their own opinions on it, but just 150,000 vehicles a day, it's like bigger than the Tappan Zee Bridge. It's a heavily trafficked roadway, one of the most heavily trafficked in the country, actually.
In a sentence for each of you, if you stand on the Brooklyn Heights Promenade 20 years from now and look out, what do you see?
Hopefully clear skies.
Well, we still see the beautiful New York City skyline and the Statue of Liberty, which is what you see today. If I look down, I would say I would love to see at the very bottom a boulevard, a road. I would love to see, and this is, I should actually clarify, this is me, Lara Birnback, speaking. I'm not
Understood.
speaking on behalf of my organization right now. I'm speaking on behalf of myself. I would love to see a decommissioned cantilever, right? So we don't have cars and trucks on those levels of the cantilever. What we do with that space, I'm open. Could be a park, it could be community uses, it could be a swimming pool, it could be, I don't know, lots of interesting things we could do there. But I would love to see no BQE as it exists today.
I share that vision, and I think you're looking out towards Manhattan, and you'll also see the beautiful Staten Island Ferry in New York Harbor.
Absolutely.
But I mean, I'm also
filling out this little painting here.
Right.
And the Brooklyn Bridge.
Also looking north and south, and seeing seeing the parts, unlike where the cantilever, seeing the parts of the city, as I said, they were clear cut, like a forest. Seeing those parts of the city restored as well.
100%.
Thank you so much, Lara Birnback, Polly Trottenberg, Stephen Nessen. Give it up. Quick note on the way out. We're doing a whole tour of these live Big Dig tapings, the Highway Teardown Tour. We're going to be in Syracuse, New York actually, let me do it the other way. We're going to be in Rochester, New York on April 7th. We're going to be in Syracuse, New York on April 8th. We're also going to be in Philadelphia. We're going to be in Baltimore. If you have friends or folks in those areas, please let them know. All the info is at wgbh.org/bigdiglive. So check it out and come check out the tour.
Thank you.
yesterday is a day, oh. Daylight come and me want go